Cleopatra VII was born in 69 BC in the great city of Alexandria, a place of scholars, merchants, and thinkers from every corner of the Mediterranean. She entered a world shaped by ambition and danger, a world where her own family, the Ptolemies, fought endlessly for the throne. She was born into a dynasty that had ruled Egypt for nearly 3 centuries, but its power was fading and its future was uncertain. Egypt was wealthy, but unstable. Its rulers were Greek, but they reigned over an Egyptian population longing for stability. And at the center of all this, a young Cleopatra watched carefully, absorbing every lesson her chaotic world had to offer. From a very young age, Cleopatra showed qualities unlike her siblings. While other royal children were raised to enjoy luxury and palace life, Cleopatra immersed herself in education. She studied philosophy, mathematics, medicine, politics, literature, astronomy, and foreign diplomacy. She trained her voice, her mind, and her presence. She learned to negotiate, to observe, and to command attention. She listened to scholars in the Library of Alexandria, one of the greatest learning centers of the ancient world. But the most extraordinary thing she did was choose to learn the Egyptian language. For generations, the Ptolemies had refused to speak it. They had ruled Egypt as outsiders. Cleopatra broke that tradition. She learned to speak to her people in their own tongue, something that would later make her one of the most beloved rulers in Egyptian memory. Cleopatra's childhood was overshadowed by her father's political struggles. Her father, Ptolemy XII Auletes, was not a strong leader. He paid enormous fortunes to Roman politicians just to remain on the throne. Riots rose against him, and eventually, he was driven out of Egypt. Cleopatra, still a young girl, was forced into exile with him. Together they traveled through foreign lands, seeking support from Rome. There, Cleopatra observed a new power rising. Rome was no longer just an ally, it was becoming the true ruler behind kings and queens. She watched how senators, generals, and wealthy men shaped the fate of nations. And she learned something that would guide her entire life: to survive, Egypt needed Rome, and she needed powerful allies. Rome eventually restored Ptolemy XII to the throne, and Cleopatra returned with him. But the lesson remained in her mind. She understood the world was changing, and Egypt needed a ruler who could navigate both Egyptian tradition and Roman influence. When her father died in 51 BCE, Cleopatra became queen at the age of 17. But she was not allowed to rule alone. According to Egyptian royal custom, she was forced to co-rule with her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII. Behind the young boy stood ambitious advisors who saw Cleopatra as a threat. They feared her intelligence, her growing popularity, and her independent mind. Within a year, Cleopatra found herself pushed out of power. Her name disappeared from official documents, her face vanished from coins, and her authority collapsed. Eventually, she was forced to flee the capital. She traveled east to gather support, raise an army, and plan her return. She was still young, but she understood the harsh reality of power. She had tasted the responsibility of ruling a nation, and she would not let it slip away without a fight. Everything changed in 48 BCE when Julius Caesar arrived in Alexandria. Caesar was the most powerful man in the Roman world, fresh from defeating his rival Pompey. Egypt's civil conflict threatened Rome's grain supply, and Caesar demanded that the fighting end. Cleopatra understood that this was her moment. She had to reach Caesar before her enemies did. Ancient accounts tell the story of how she secretly entered Caesar's quarters, wrapped in a sack or roll of cloth to avoid detection. When she emerged, she made her case directly. She argued for her right to rule, for the stability of Egypt, and for the partnership she could offer Rome. Caesar was impressed. He saw intelligence, charisma, and political skill far beyond her young age. He supported her claim. This decision triggered the Alexandrian War, where Caesar and Cleopatra fought against the forces of Ptolemy XIII. The war was brutal, but Caesar emerged victorious. Ptolemy XIII died attempting to flee, and Cleopatra was restored to the throne. She was only 22 years old, but she had already survived exile, betrayal, and a civil war. As queen once again, Cleopatra focused on rebuilding her country. She strengthened Egypt's economy, restored the currency, and expanded trade. She supported scholars, reopened important temples, and improved tax systems. She traveled the Nile with Caesar, showing him the lands she now ruled firmly. Their alliance grew, and eventually Cleopatra gave birth to a son, Ptolemy XV, known as Caesar Ion. But history shifted again when Caesar returned to Rome and was killed in 44 BCE. Cleopatra lost her strongest ally. Rome plunged into chaos as new leaders fought for power. Cleopatra now had to navigate a world where every Roman general held the potential to become her enemy or her protector. Two men rose to the top: Octavian, Caesar's adopted son, and Mark Antony, Caesar's former general. The Roman world was divided between them. Antony took control of the eastern provinces, which made him the most important figure for Egypt's future. When Antony summoned Cleopatra to meet him in Tarsus in 41 BCE, she did not come as a frightened ruler. She arrived as a queen who understood the power of presentation. Ancient writers describe her arrival in a magnificent barge, carrying wealth, music, and symbolism. It was not just display, it was diplomacy. Antony needed Egypt's wealth, and Cleopatra needed Roman protection. Their political partnership strengthened, and together they shaped politics across the eastern Mediterranean. Cleopatra regained territories Egypt had lost, and she secured her position as an independent ruler. Egypt became a powerful partner to Antony, not a subordinate. But their rise alarmed Octavian in Rome. He launched a public campaign, accusing Cleopatra of trying to influence Rome and portraying Antony as a man captured by a foreign queen. Political propaganda turned public opinion against them. This rivalry grew into a conflict that would decide the future of the ancient world. In 31 BCE, the forces of Octavian faced Antony and Cleopatra at the Battle of Actium. Their fleet was overwhelmed. The battle was a decisive defeat. Antony and Cleopatra retreated to Egypt, hoping to rebuild their power, but Rome was unstoppable. Octavian marched into Egypt in 30 BCE. Alexandria fell under his control. With Rome closing in, Cleopatra knew that Egypt's independence had ended. Ancient accounts say she made a deliberate choice to avoid being taken to Rome as a trophy of war. Her exact death remains one of history's great mysteries, debated for centuries by scholars, but all records agree it brought Egypt's last resistance to an end. After Cleopatra's death, Egypt became a Roman province. It would never again be ruled by a native dynasty. The age of pharaohs ended. Yet Cleopatra's legacy survived. She spoke many languages, something rare among ancient rulers. She governed with strategy, intelligence, and cultural understanding. She restored Egypt's strength for decades despite the rising power of Rome. And she became one of the most unforgettable figures in world history. Cleopatra VII was the last pharaoh, but her influence extended far beyond Egypt's borders. She shaped diplomacy between empires, navigated the shifting politics of Rome, and stood against the most powerful forces of her era. Her life was a story of survival, leadership, and remarkable intellect. And her name continues to live centuries after her kingdom fell, a symbol of determination, strategy, and the extraordinary power of a single individual in the vast currents of history.